Okay, on the front of what I handed you is an amazing statement from Debashish Banerjee. And I want to introduce him in his absence and state that Debashish is Doshi Professor of Indian Art and the Director of the East-West Psychology Program at California Institute for Integral Studies. I got to know Debashish many years ago when he was the director of the East-West Center, which is the Aurobindo Center just down the hill here on Marshall Street, and knew him during his work as the graduate student studying the paintings of the Tagore family at UCLA for his PhD. We've done many art exhibits together. He had a rather remarkable display of Tagore artifacts and photographs. He's a member of the Tagore family, and for many years he was the educational director of the University of Philosophical Research over in Los Feliz. So he brings a richness of perspective and is very much like Lorelei, quite up to date with Deleuze and all of the wonderful languaging of relationality. And I just love this opening sentence because it makes it possible for us to discover our emplacement and own it and not be embarrassed by it. So, dear Chris, I was going to say that the word appropriation belongs to a property economy, and that communitarian economies, such as those of the spiritual lineages of India, have appropriated freely from each other for their own purposes. So I love the critique of Western materialism, or any materialism, doesn't have to be Western. I love the permission to celebrate communitarianism, which is relational, as well as to say appropriating is okay, because we've long borrowed and cross-borrowed. Yantras, and I bring your attention again to the Sri Yantra that is physically in front of us, have common base elements. Bindu, the red dot in the center, Trikona, the triangles, Chatushkona, the four sides, Chakra, Padma, okay, the plexuses of energy, as well as the rather abstract representation of the lotus. And these are combined to achieve engines of praxis. And isn't that a wonderful terminology that he has coined here? Engines, that is, these power centers of practice, that it's about the practice. And we've been so blessed with so much mantra here and have all felt the energization of that mantra. Such an engine, right there and right here, means something to those who accept its conventions. But others have re-signified these diagrams and reoriented their images. Now we're beginning to come into the realm of Sri Aurobindo. We're beginning to come into the realm of where this PowerPoint is headed, which are, quote, New Age representations. Appropriation does become an issue when a property economy snatches a communitarian object or practice for property values. Okay? And if we think of Andrea Jain's book, Selling Yoga, she points out quite quietly that sometimes a yoga mat is just a yoga mat, and sometimes a yoga mat is part of a multi-billion-dollar industry. But if taken for communitarian or quasi-communitarian uses, it has not been considered an issue. Bina Chowdhury appropriated the Sri Chakra as the logo for the California Institute for Integral Studies. And for those of you who are not aware, there were a couple of people, a professor from Stanford, what was his name, who traveled to Pondicherry in the early 1950s.
Spiegelberg.
Spiegelberg. and then invited his students, including Michael Murphy, to then travel to Pondicherry. And then the suggestion was given that Chowdhury, given directly by Aurobindo and the mother, that Chowdhury be sent to San Francisco to disseminate the work of the mother, to disseminate the work of Sri Aurobindo. And it was the wife of Chowdhury who said, Sri Yantra, Sri Chakra. Then, Sunanda. Okay, and again, our other visual prompt here of the material form is Sunanda Shastri. During her first visit to the East-West Cultural Center at the base of the hill here on Marshall Street, Sunandaji Shastri stood in front of the glass case carrying the mother's sari and gasped. And one of my pleasant memories would be periodically, about once a year, they would bring out a sari that belonged to the mother in pure white and venerate the sari because it was considered to hold the vibration of her body upon which it had been draped. Then she said that as she was about to lower her head onto the case, she saw none other than Rajeshwari. That this vision came to her, and that she was on her lion. And we just saw that image from Anya. She saw that appear in the case. Now, was this a problem? Did she imaginatively appropriate the mother? I love Devashish. This is so clever. It is laughable to think of such things. The divine comes to us when we approach the divine. In my talk, which we will give to one another now, I was going to speak of the symbols of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother as simple forms which go into the design of the Sri Chakra, but also point out that the cosmology of Sri Aurobindo lends itself to a better visualization using these adaptations of the Sri Chakra. And I want to highlight the descent of consciousness as a cornerstone of Sri Aurobindo, where he, rather like Chamatkara, emphasizes that it's through discovering the gifts of the goddess in the world that we arrive at that point of consciousness. And then he will also point to contemporary New Age visual adaptations of the Sri Chakra appearing on the web as forms of neo-tantric art, and we'll get to them. And that these also can be used effectively for meditation. And Joe, our wonderful cantor from last night, and myself, just returned from the vortex of the New Age. We just were at the Sedona Yoga Festival. And yes, the Sri Yantra can be found in abundance there. And we had such a good time. So if we look at this first diagram, okay. What we see listed is KS, which I think is Kashmir Shaivite cosmology, and the para, or para apara, and the apara we see as on your sheet Parama Shiva, Shaiva Shakti, Sada Shiva, Ishvara, and Sudavidya. And then that's the stuff on top. And then more or less in the middle we get Maya in the Kunchikas that are covering over that, and then Purusha, and then everything below is the traditional counting that we see in Samkhya that we had reviewed rather quickly there. And then as we go to the next page, we see the Sri Aurobindo Cosmology, which has up above existence, consciousness, bliss, and what he influenced by Nietzsche called supermind, which is in the category of knowledge or vidya. And then in the middle, the overmind, intuition, illumined mind, and higher mind, which is this relationship between knowledge and ignorance, vidya and avidya. And then in the lower realm, just pure, old-fashioned ignorance. So it is, in a sense, simplification perhaps. And then the simplification view of Kashmir Shaivism, which are the mirror planes of existence below, rather existence above and matter below, the Sat, as in Atman, if we want to do a kosha thing, and then the Anam, the matter, the foodstuff below, and this balance or vacillation between knowledge and ignorance. Then we go next to the Kashmir Shaiva cosmology of mirror planes, and complexifying it a little bit, adding consciousness below existence and life above matter. And then a third Kashmir Shaiva edition, which would be the Vijnana, interesting way to translate this into supermind here, but the mind below. So we get this reflection. The Vijnana would be the repository of the bhavas, and the mind would be the repository of the manifested vrittis. Then moving even further, we find the addition of Ananda within the Vijnana, and we get the psychic being or the chaitya, the conscious person, above the mind. So we see a joining of above and below in the middle point. Iliade would love that. And then we go forward into what Sri Vidya puts, rather Sri Aurobindo puts in that middle place. And those of you who possess in your library the books that were published in, by Sri Aurobindo, these adorn the cover. And we can see the downward, the upward triangles, and the water with the lotus, and the square in the middle. So how is this described? The surrounding triangles represent Sat, Chit, the descending triangle represents Sat, Chit, Ananda. The ascending triangle represents the aspiring answers from matter, under the form of, and this is life, light, and love, by Sri Aurobindo. The juncture of both, the central square, is the perfect manifestation, having at its center the avatar of the Supreme, the lotus. The water inside the square represents the multiplicity, the creation. Is it what?
Neoplatonism.
Neoplatonism, yes. And now the mother symbol, far less angular. The central circle represents the divine consciousness. The four petals represent the four powers of the mother. The 12 petals represent the 12 powers of the mother manifested for her work. And then this is the pièce de résistance, placing the two symbols of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, transposing them onto one another. The effective manifestation of Ishvara and Ishvari in union. And then we move into the traditional Sri Chakra, both on the screen and to your left. A slightly more abstract and colorful representation thereof. And here, these can be found on the web, where you can have the computer help you color things in. And then we have really a little bit more dynamism, a little bit more color. It becomes quite three-dimensional. And you can almost see this energizing the holographic aircraft in Black Panther. And then finally, here we go. So praise to the mother, she keeps moving. So any observations? Because I think he gave us just a real rich visual treat here. Yes, please.
I understand the Sri Vidya, Tantra, Yantra, and practice.
Yes.
Where does Aurobindo and Mother's practice stand?
You know, that's a really good question. And Devashish wrote a remarkable book that includes Deleuze, but he took newly released documents from the Aurobindo archives, and he wrote a book called The Four Septets. The Seven Quartets. Seven Quartets. And what Aurobindo did through the 30s and 40s and 50s was journal. And he kept detailed records of his original sort of samadhi experience, and then both the struggles and the particulars of how he charted. And what Devashish did in creating this book was to see 4 groups of 7 and 7 groups of 4. You can do it, you know, either way. And he narrated the fact that during that time he was reclusive. He very rarely spoke, he very rarely interacted with other people. And then during that time, as the mother was there, she remained the public face. She remained the interpreter, and she was very active in conceptualizing, building up Auroville, and giving to the world what we now have as really the vehicle for the promulgation of his deep reflection. So that's as much as I can say, is that I read the book, and it's quite fascinating, and I recommend it.
That's not a whole lot of practice.
No, it's hard.
Depending on
I think the book that he took it from was these journals of yoga, and Aurobindo did an amazing amount of like he would sort of do the Prakamya Siddhi, where he would sort of practice trying to see if he could get ants walking along the wall to go a completely different direction just by power of the mind. So he did a lot of practice, and these are recorded in these yoga journals.
What my question is, Sri Vidya, as Anya presented, exists.
Yeah.
It's practiced, it exists. What happened to Aurobindo's practices? Are they practiced now? That's what I'm asking.
Study of his works.
That's all. No spiritual practices.
Well,
meditation.
There's meditation, there's veneration of the mother's sari. There are musical events. They consider the creation of art to be a very, very important form of spiritual practice. Reflective architecture, and the gathering of, it's like a mini World's Fair if you go to Auroville. All different countries are represented, and they do lots of handicraft artistry. So that for them is an expression of their reflection on that symbol that we saw, where we want to combine both the quiet and the still of the lotus with the circulatory creative movement of what we saw with the mother symbol.
And only practice and taught, or at least wrote about Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga as well, that's what I want.
There was Hatha Yoga also taught. Yeah.
During Aurobindo's time, the 2 great worshippers of Sri Vidya, Kapala Shastri, Pandit Kapala Shastri, and then Vasishtha Ganapati Muni, they were with Aurobindo. They were great worshippers of Sri Vidya, Kapala Shastri. They were worshipping there, Sri Chakra,
Very
in
interesting.
Aurobindo ashram, with Aurobindo.
Ganpati Muni was with Ramana Maharshi.
in
Ganpati
fact,
Muni
He
was
was
Ramana
with
Maharshi.
Ramana Maharshi also. He was.
Yeah, Ramana Maharshi.
Yeah.
In fact, there is another aspect of Aurobindo that is not coming through at all. He has written extensively on the spiritual, psychological and spiritual interpretation of Veda.
Yeah.
His Secret of Veda, Hymns to the Mystic Fire, HMF, all those books are classics. And in those tradition, under the guidance of of course, Kavali Shastri had independent ideas of the spiritual reflection. So he left Vasishtha Ganapati Muni in 1930 and went to Aurobindo's ashram. And on the very first day, he is a classic practitioner of Veda and Tantra, Kavali Shastri. And when he saw mother over there, the orthodox nature in him could not initially accept, and then he came back, but then again went back because of the independent derived Aurobindo's spiritual and psychological interpretations, and he did Siddhanjana and of the spiritual meanings of Veda, and Professor Kashyap, who was a professor in electrical engineering at Purdue, after his retirement went back to Bangalore and started a Sakshi, Sri Aurobindo Kavali Shastri Institute of Vedic Studies, and Professor Kashyap has translated all 5 Vedas in 26 volumes with spiritual and philosophical meanings. If you read that, it is as good as this summary from the Upanishads. All those things are in the Veda itself. So when Professor Purushottam started earlier, that came from sacrificial. According to Aurobindo's, rishis only had the internal meditation and all that, but that is only for the initiates. For the masses, it will not be able to do. So he used the dual meanings in the Vedic mantras and started the sacrificial. So Veda is not sacrificial at all, but the problem is Sainacharya, who gave the complete analysis in the 13th century. Sainacharya is the author who translated word by word all the Vedas. He was a ritualist. He came from Sringeri Mutt and all that. So the whole translation, even while he recognized, even while there are spiritual meanings, he's only going to emphasize the ritualistic aspect. And then all this English translation from which 90% of the people understand Veda, because Sainacharya also is in Sanskrit. The 1700, 1800, Griffith, Wilson, Max Muller, Edward Jones, all of them followed Saina, because that is the only available. So suddenly Veda became a ritual, and no one even mentions, but Aurobindo's contributions is now on Veda is equally profound. And I have been working with Professor Kashyap for the past 10 years, and I have re-understood the meaning of this, the practice of Veda, the sacrifice in relation to how Aurobindo explains. That part of Aurobindo is not very much known because of his contributions to the yoga.
I will narrate one incident. Practical incident.
In fact,
Kapali Shastri, he was failing. He was in the ashram. He came to ashrama. He was a great worshiper of Sri Vidya.
Here, we need sort of loud.
The Kapali Shastri,
it was going in the
great scholar and worshipper of Sri Vidya. He went to Aurobindo's ashrama. Then he said, he saw the mother. See, in ashrama, what they do? Offering the food. Mother was tasting first. Then offering it to the others as a prasad. And he was a very orthodox person. He said, the French lady, French lady is touching all these things, I will not eat. I will go. But what happened, he was, next day morning he was sleeping. And he got up early in the morning, went to the terrace, he was meditating. Then the mother came down and in the form of Sri Chakra in front of him. He was a worshipper of Sri Vidya, Sri Chakra. The mother herself, she came down and then she turned into Sri Chakra. She took the form of Sri Chakra. Then he started venerating or worshipping mother also. That is, it's happened, it is noted.
Yeah, there, in
So Bharat is
Shastra's
identified
story,
with Sri Chakra.
yeah, there's a lot of coding about cultural appropriation that calls into question what is the nature of culture. And the story of Aurobindo is that his parents intended for him to be raised as a proper British civil servant, well educated, and they sent him to England. They refused to allow anyone to speak to him in Hindi or in any other Indian language. They wanted him to be the perfect English gentleman. And he became very highly educated. When he returned, he sort of went through this identity crisis, if you will, and became a revolutionary, was thrown into jail, and escaped into the French Quarter, both on the west coast and then in the Calcutta region before settling in Pondicherry, because the British considered him to be seditious. And in that first imprisonment, he had not only this rupture with agreed upon reality, but he also decided to educate himself while he was in prison so that he could recover the culture of his parents and of India. So he studied Sanskrit, and what he brought to his interpretation of the Vedas really literally changed the world. And in New York, we had two great teachers. One, my own woman teacher, Grani Anjali, who was raised in the 40s and the 50s in India. And what they did in her ashram was to read Aurobindo. And then there was in Queens a teacher called Sri Chinmoy, who had spent many, many years at the Aurobindo ashram before promulgating his form of meditation in New York City. But the really the after effects are profound, because they call into question, what does it mean to be Paka? What does it mean? You know, who has access to knowledge? Is it only to Brahmins? No. Are French people excluded? No. What we need to do is to nuance our interpretation so that, you know, in the wisdom of Devashish, that we can always be on guard against a property economy, and to be in the place of a communitarian economy, in a place of accepting authentic borrowings and appropriations. So as we know that we are now in the 21st century, and those of us who came of age in the 20th century are handing off to fine people such as Joe and Alex and Karen and so many others that are learning what they can about their culture, and as India has changed so dramatically and become really driven by a property economy lamentably in so many ways, we know that the work of small events such as this can have a lasting effect, and that part of her mission was to create a grammar, to create materials that allow these ideas to be shared, really shared. And I just want to celebrate Sunanda's life. I want to celebrate the generosity of the Varanasi family and the Doshi family. Celebrate the generosity of those who really came and dedicated so much time to this moment, and to thank again the many students and the staff that have supported this. Alex, Karen, and Sarah are right there, and Joe's mom. And that we will have a public posting of the lectures on the Yoga Studies YouTube channel, and that we will also have a private posting of the memorial service. And if you're interested in seeing that or having that, just ask us. So again, thank you all for being here.